A 64-year-old man is brought to the emergency department by his wife after she finds him unresponsive at the bottom of a staircase. She tells first responders he'd been bedridden for 3 days with severe vertigo, dizziness, nausea, couldn't get out of bed. She'd been taking care of him the whole time. By the time paramedics arrive, there is nothing they can do. He's pronounced dead at the scene. July 21st, 2018. Lake Wylie, South Carolina. The coroner's preliminary examination finds no bruises, no signs of trauma from the fall. But there is something else. Discoloration of the skin consistent with cardiovascular failure. His heart, it appears, simply stopped. And for a moment, that's the end of the story. A retired businessman with an enlarged heart, gallbladder disease, and congested lungs dies from what looks like cardiac arrest. Tragic, but not unusual for a man his age. But Stephen Clayton's family didn't believe it. And what investigators eventually found in his blood would change everything about this case. Stephen Clayton had built a company called Physical Therapy Resources in the 1980s, targeting sports rehabilitation. It grew into a national chain with branches across the country. He sold the business, retired in his early 40s, and spent the next 2 decades living on a lakefront estate in South Carolina that he'd modelled after George Washington's Mount Vernon. He was known for throwing enormous parties, live music, fireworks, friends and family everywhere. By all accounts, he was generous, funny, and loved being in love. He'd been married 6 times before. His family joked that Steve was a hopeless romantic. In November 2013, he married Lana Sue Clayton. She was a nurse who worked at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Charlotte. His family was happy for him. A nurse, they thought, someone who could take care of him, they had no idea. In May 2016, something happened that everyone chose to overlook. Lana told police she accidentally shot Stephen in the back of the head with a crossbow while he was sleeping. She said she'd been carrying it through the bedroom and it went off. Stephen survived. The wound was minor, almost miraculously. Both of them told police it was an accident, and detectives closed the case the following year. No charges were filed. 2 years later, Stephen was dead. After his death on July 21st, Lana wanted no autopsy. She told investigators she was worried it would reveal that Stephen had been using marijuana. But Stephen's nephew, Nick French, was a police officer. He noticed Lana wasn't behaving the way you'd expect from a grieving wife. She never mentioned trying to revive her husband, and Stephen's phone, which he always carried, was nowhere to be found. The family pushed for an autopsy, and when the toxicology report came back a month later, the coroner found something she'd never seen before: tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in Visine eye drops. Stephen Clayton's blood contained roughly 30 times the level you'd expect from someone using eye drops normally. And this is where the medical story gets disturbing. Here's how tetrahydrozoline works. When you put it in your eyes, it activates something called alpha adrenergic receptors on the blood vessels in your conjunctiva. Those receptors tell the blood vessels to constrict, to tighten up. Less blood flow means less redness. That's all it's supposed to do. But when you swallow it, the drug doesn't stay local. It enters the bloodstream and starts activating those same receptors throughout the entire body. First, it hits the peripheral alpha-1 receptors on blood vessels everywhere. They constrict, blood pressure spikes. The body detects this sudden hypertension and triggers a reflex response through the valgus nerve. The heart slows down. That's called reflex bradycardia. But here's the problem. The tetrahydrozoline is also an imidazoline derivative, which means it crosses into the central nervous system. Once there, it activates alpha-2 receptors in the brainstem, which directly suppresses the sympathetic nervous system. Your body's entire fight or flight response starts shutting down. Heart rate drops further, blood pressure collapses, respiratory drive weakens. The victim becomes drowsy, then lethargic, then unresponsive. And because the drug has a half-life of about 6 hours, these effects don't just flash and fade, they persist. In documented cases, cardiovascular effects have lasted up to 36 hours from a single ingestion. Now imagine that happening not once, but repeatedly over 3 days. Every time Lana Clayton dropped Visine into Stephen's water and coffee, his cardiovascular system took another hit before recovering from the last one. His heart was slowing, recovering slightly, then being forced to slow again. His blood pressure was cycling between dangerous lows and brief strained recoveries. The vertigo, the nausea, the inability to get out of bed. Those weren't random symptoms of illness, that was tetrahydrozoline poisoning. His central nervous system was being systematically suppressed by a drug that's colourless, odourless and tasteless when dissolved in water. And Lana Clayton was a nurse. She understood medications. She understood that this substance wouldn't show up on a routine toxicology screen, because standard panels don't test for it. Labs have to specifically look for tetrahydrozoline to find it. The coroner, Sabrina Gast, later admitted she had to look up what tetrahydrozoline even was when the result came back. She'd never encountered it before. When investigators confronted Lana with the toxicology results, she initially claimed Stephen liked to put Visine in his morning coffee to help with his bowel movements. Forensic toxicologists call that absurd. Hours later, in a second interview at the couple's home, Lana changed her story. She admitted she'd been putting the eye drops in his drinks, but she insisted she never meant to kill him. She told investigators she was angry, that Stephen was controlling and verbally abusive, that she wanted him to feel sick, to be miserable for a while. She said a co-worker once told her that putting Visine in someone's drink would cause diarrhea, and that's all she expected. That's actually a common myth. There's an old urban legend that putting Visine in someone's drink causes violent diarrhea. The reality is far worse. The actual effects range from severe nausea and seizures to cardiovascular collapse and coma. In high enough doses, or with repeated exposure, it kills. Prosecutors painted a very different picture of motive. They alleged Lana had destroyed Stephen's will so she could inherit his estate, worth over $1 million in property alone, plus additional assets. They believed she threw his cell phone into the lake so he couldn't call for help while the poison did its work. And they pointed to the crossbow incident 2 years earlier as evidence of a pattern. Investigators also found evidence that paperwork had been burned on the Clayton property. Stephen's family and former partners disputed every claim of abuse. His ex-girlfriend of nearly 3 years said he was never violent, never cruel. His nephew and other relatives confirmed they had never witnessed any abusive behaviour. His goddaughter told the court that Lana had fooled everyone. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food or drugs. She could have faced life in prison or the death penalty on the original murder charge. Instead, she was sentenced to 25 years. The judge looked at her during sentencing and said something that stuck with everyone in the courtroom. "How can you maintain you did this to teach him a lesson when it is obvious from the facts that you let him suffer for 3 days? You ignored him." Stephen Clayton's death was initially ruled a heart attack. Without his family pushing for that autopsy, without his nephew noticing the missing phone and the strange behaviour, it would have stayed that way. Lana Clayton would have inherited everything, and tetrahydrozoline would never have been found. Experts now argue that tetrahydrozoline should be included in standard toxicology panels during autopsies. It's cheap, it's accessible, it's undetectable by taste or smell, and the symptoms it produces can easily be mistaken for natural cardiovascular failure. Since Stephen's death, at least 4 other homicide cases involving the same chemical have made national headlines. Something sitting in nearly every medicine cabinet in America, designed to take the red out of your eyes, and in the wrong hands, capable of stopping a human heart. If this case disturbed you as much as it did me, there's another one you need to see. Just 2 months after Stephen died, and only 12 miles from his home, the exact same poison killed again. That video is on screen now.